Good evening and welcome to Writers on Writing. I'm your host, Dr. Brenda Greene, and I am founder and executive director of the Center for Black Literature at McGill College and director of the National Black Writers Conference. This podcast and radio broadcast comes to you every Sunday and gives you, our listening audience, an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their craft, and their lives. And this is paid for by Medgar Evers College Radio. I'm so pleased to have with me this evening the award-winning poet, educator, and publisher, Kwame Alexander. Welcome, Kwame.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so good to be here. I'm honored.
Okay, well, we're honored to have you. Just a little bit about Kwame Alexander. He is a two-time Emmy-nominated writer, producer, best-selling author of 39 books, including Why Fathers Cry at Night, a memoir in love poems, recipes, letters, and remembrances, The Door of No Return, and Light for the World to See, 1,000 Words on Race and Hope. And his most recent book is a wonderful anthology that cuts across generations and Black arts and hip hop and has all of those writers. This is the Honey. This is the Honey. So I'm very excited about that. I don't know if you know that I did a book review of that. And
I didn't know
yes,
that.
I will send that to you. It's in our local newspaper, Our Time Press, Brooklyn newspaper. So I'll send you the link for the book review, but really enjoyed it because you had a number of the writers who we've had at the conference who've presented at our programs. But I first like to hear something about you. You grew up in an African-centered background and influence, and I remember being very surprised when I saw you on MSNBC, and you talked about going to Yoruba Sasa.
Yep.
So how did that background help to shape you as a poet, writer, and publisher? My children went to Weusi Shule.
My sisters went to Weusi Shule.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure, like I said, our paths had to have crossed.
Yeah.
Johnson, yes.
Yes. So I grew up on President Street between New York and Brooklyn Avenue. And I remember going to the Muse. I remember going to the Brooklyn Public Library with my mother on Saturdays. I remember my parents taking us to the East at 10 Claver Place.
Yes.
I remember as a 9, 10-year-old meeting Hakeem Madabuti, Sonia Sanchez, Amiri Baraka, Sun Ra. Like, I had no idea who these folks were. I was listening to the poetry and like playing with my friends, and couldn't wait to go to the East Co-op to get cashews because I was real into cashews.
Raw cashews, right?
Raw cashews. But yeah, so I grew up in this environment where, Black self-determination was just a matter of fact. It was just, we are about the business of improving the lives of Black people for us, by us. And so everything I read, I don't remember a time where there were no books written by Black authors on my shelves. Like, it was always, from the time I was born, there was Spin a Soft Black Song, Mickey Giovanni. There was Lucille Clifton, the Everett Anderson series. There was Ernest Gregg, and the Sun God Said That's Hip. Like, I just remember it was all Black books. That was my life. And so I think that had a tremendous impact on my creative life and my thinking that, the sort of the larger world was not going to determine for me what I could do and how I could do it.
Right.
So yeah, that, I was very fortunate. My father was the headmaster of Uhuru Sasa for a year while I was there. My mother taught at CUNY. And we just lived, a very, like a free life, as it were. We felt free. We felt like we were Black, and that was not a burden. There was not a weight to it. It was you had a responsibility, and I'll sum it up like this: we had to remember Yehuda Sasa Shule. We had to memorize this poem, and we all had to say it. I am the black child. You have brought me into this world about which I know nothing. You hold in my hands my destiny. You determine whether I shall succeed or fail. Give me, I beg you, a world where I can stand tall and proud. It was a poem we recited to our elders every day. So that was my
And
life.
you internalized that. And when did you begin writing?
I began writing in earnest probably at the age of 12 when we moved out of Brooklyn to Virginia Beach, Virginia, which
Okay.
was a big culture shift.
Yes, I can imagine.
And so I began writing um, as a way to sort of deal and cope with everything I was sort of, encountering in terms of the culture shift. And also, I began writing as a way to mimic the writers that I was reading. So my father had a lot of books, probably about 11,000 books in his garage, in our garage, and I was in charge of organizing these books, which was a years long process. And during the course of organizing these books, I came across titles like Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams,
Yes.
Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, every book by Dr. Ben. And so those books were not of interest to me as a 12 or 13-year-old kid,
Right.
but the books that were interested, because they were real thick, the books that were interesting to me were these thin broadsides and pamphlets. And these
Yes.
were poetry books that
Yes.
Third, Third World Press published,
Don Lee, right.
Don Lee. And
That's
so
right.
Sam Greenlee wrote poetry,
Mhm.
Carolyn Rogers, Sonia Sanchez, Naomi Long Madgett. And so I'm Askia Toure. And so I'm reading all these books and I can get through the book in 10 minutes because it's so short. And the poems are so short and they're concise and they're hitting, but you feel something really powerful. And I was like, ooh, I want to write stuff like that. So I began writing these little short poems that I thought, that hopefully would have an impact on the reader, which was just my mother at that point.
Okay. So let's go move fast forward to This is the Honey,
Yep.
which you talk about it being a gathering space for Black writers, for Black poets to honor and celebrate, to be romantic and provocative, to be unburdened and bodacious. So
Yeah.
why was it important to write this anthologies? It's a bit different than the anthologies we've seen in the past, although it is in the tradition of other anthologies, but it's more it seems more weighted toward those celebrations, romantic and
Yeah.
provocative and just celebrating life and healing. It has all of it, but it's a bit different
Yeah.
than previous anthologies.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of anthologies and have loved them over the years. And I felt like whether it was, Woody King's Black Spirits anthology back in the 70s, or whether it was Ethelbert Miller's anthology in the 90s, In Search of Color Everywhere, or whether it was Kevin Powell's In the Tradition in the 90s, they all sort of spoke to the time, to the moment. And the moment that I find that we are in right now, in my family, in the Black community, is one I like to call matter of fact Black.
Hmm.
That yes, we are proud of who we are. And we have to be reminded that we laugh, we hope, we dream, we dance, we smile, we love, we live just like everybody else. And so it's important for us to remember that. And it's important for the world to see that because really what that speaks to is our humanity. And I think so often we get lost in sort of the trauma and we forget about the triumph and we get sort of boggled down in the weight of the woe and we forget about the wonder. And I really wanted to celebrate that. Like I felt like that was important in this moment, in this time. especially as it relates to my kid. When I see my 15-year-old, I want her to think that, anything's possible. I want her to know what's happening in this world and that it's not so beautiful sometimes, but she's beautiful and she matters. And
Yes.
so that was sort of where it came from.
Yes, it's as you talk, I'm thinking about one of the tasks I had or responsibilities I had was to manage Incurable Books. I don't know if you remember Incurable Books.
Yes.
And, my son had been manager before that, but he talked about how people came in the store and they didn't want to just read about the trauma. They
Right.
didn't want to just read about how, particularly, look, people looking for books for their children. They didn't want to just read about, the enslavement and all of that. They wanted books that expressed other experiences and that showed the multi-dimensional experiences of Black people. And I think that's part of what you've done here and in your children's literature. Are there any particular poems or highlights that stood out for you as you were developing this anthology?
Well, funny story is the love poems, you know, easily outweighed the other poems in the book. Like
Yeah.
they were, just there were hundreds and hundreds of love poems, and I had to end up cutting back, that hurt me because I really, and this started as a collection of love poems.
Mhm.
It was gonna be love poems only, and then it
Okay.
sort of like spread out and expanded. But I think all of the love poems. When I think of Willie Perdomo's poem, that's my heart right there. That's my love right there. When I think of Kalamu's poem, Ethelbert's poem. Ethelbert is like one of the best love poets I've ever read. He's like
Yes, he
so
is. Love
short and to the
language.
point. Yes,
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So the love poems really, really stood out to me. And then I think probably the title poem by Mahogany Brown, "This Is the
Yes.
Honey." Um, that poem just really it speaks to the entirety of the book, I think.
Yes. I was also impressed by the one Jacqueline Johnson did on Nina Simone.
Oh yes,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
one of my favorites. One of my favorites also. And just going back to talking about love poems and healing, I was just so taken and impressed by Why Fathers Cry at Night. I initially read it and then I lent my copy to someone. And so I went back and listened to it.
Mm,
I'm so glad I listened to it because hearing you read the stories and hearing the recipes, I don't really cook that much. I wanted to go out and start cooking. And
right.
and just hearing how you talked about so openly about how difficult the pain and the loss and what it feels like when you're hurting inside. That's not something we normally see from men in particular.
And
Yeah, how did you get to that point where you could write about that?
well, it's a good point. It's an excellent question. All I can say is that had I known what I was doing, I probably would not have done it.
Mm,
And that I did not set out to write a memoir. I didn't set out to sort of, you know, deal with all of the pain that I had been going through and didn't even know I was going through pain and grief and longing and loss. But I think, the universe has a way of conspiring, the ancestors,
yes.
God, the creator, to give us what we need. And
Mhm.
I needed this. Where I was in my life wasn't serving me in the best way as a man, as a partner, as a lover, as a father, as a son, as a friend. And and so dealing with the end of my marriage and estrangement from my kid, my oldest kid, and my mother passing, all of that sort of happened when my career is just blossoming. I'm like, but wait a minute, my career is blossoming. Why am I not happy?
Yes.
And so poetry has always been the language of love for me to understand myself and to understand the world and my place in it. So I just began writing. And the more I wrote, the more I revealed, it became, you know, 3 or 4 years into that process, it became clear that I was telling a story. I was telling my story and that it was necessary. I did not know that it was a memoir per se until I read the advanced reading copy in February 2023, at
Okay.
which point I said, there's no way I can publish this book. It's too revealing. I called the publisher. I said, you got to pull it. You cannot publish it.
It takes a lot
And
of courage to write a memoir. Yes.
whew, and the book was already at the printer, so it was too late. So I sort of backed into it, but God, did it save me? Did it save me? And I was able to come out on the other side of that, having some much more authentic relationship with the people I love and with the people who love me, and just begin to understand, you know, what I needed to work on. Like it was really helpful. The writing saved me in so many ways.
How long did it take you to do that, this memoir?
I probably wrote it over 3 or 4 years. About
Okay,
3 years I wrote it. hmm
right.
Yeah, and even when it was published in May of 2023, I wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready. Like, I think it was probably about 6 or 7 months after the book came out where it sort of finally hit me that writing the book was just you opening a door, Kwame.
Right, right.
Now you gotta walk through it
Okay.
and do the work. That's when it hit me.
Yes.
But when it hit me, it was just like, it was a light bulb moment and a light, it was life giving and life
Right.
saving for sure.
So that's your response to the book. What has been the response of readers?
Well, let me preface it by saying the, the relationships that I have with my father, with my daughter, with my siblings is way better now. It's way much
Wow.
more authentic now. When it came out, my sisters ain't like it. My dad said, I read your little memoir. He was in his feelings. My daughter was it was tough. And I
Yes.
think it was really tough because I hadn't shared it with anyone in advance.
Were you asked to share that? 'Cause I thought that's
No.
part of, okay.
But again, I didn't know I was writing a memoir. So why would
It's
I thought I
true.
was
Yeah.
just writing poems.
So you don't normally share, do you normally share what you're writing with anyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You
I'll share
decided not to share that one.
yeah, I didn't share I shared pieces, but I didn't share it as a whole, story. And so I think, next time around, if I am going to do another memoir, I would probably share it with the folks who were in it.
Okay.
But readers, I was floored by the response because that was one of my worries is that I'm writing the story about my life, a part of my life cares. Like, why are people going to care? And what is it going to do for them? And I tell you, I met people on tour. One woman, 77-year-old woman in Cape Cod, she just cried the whole time I was talking. And she talked to me afterwards and she said she hadn't talked to her two sons in 5 years. And she was going to go home and call them that night.
Oh, it's
So I
beautiful.
feel like, yeah, I feel like it opened up some doors for some readers, hopefully.
Well, I think what you've underscored there is the importance of sharing our stories and just having the courage to do it. And I remember one of the things Taki says when, many people come to him because of third world press and they want to get published. And his
Right.
first question is, what makes you think you have a story worth telling or what that
Right.
people want to hear? But I think yours, as I said, it takes a lot of courage. And there were many different points that people could go into: women, children, men, fathers. You explored all of that. And
Right.
then the Caribbean background. I mean, it has everything in it.
Yeah.
So as I said, I really appreciate it more hearing you read it. So I
That was tough.
encourage our listenings. Oh, was.
Oh, reading that audiobook was tough. I knew that I was going to break down reading the letter to my mother. So I just saved that until the very end. That was the last thing I did before I left the studio. And it just broke me. Um, it was tough. It was tough because also that was also during a time where I hadn't realized how much work I needed to do. Like I had written about it, I
Mhm.
put it down on paper, which is a first step, which is
Right.
good, but it ain't the final step. And I hadn't understood. I thought it was the final step. I hadn't understood. Oh no, this is
Yes,
just the
it's the
beginning,
beginning.
dude. You got work to do.
Yes,
So
it's the beginning.
you're
So,
right.
writing, as you know, is a lonely process, and the writer is always in conversation with other writers. You've named some of the people who've influenced you. Who are you in conversation with when you write, and who do you read? Yeah.
You know, inevitably, um, in America, the greatest reward for originality in words, song, and visual melody is to have dull people call you weird and ask you what you do for a living. Like Haki is just a genius at being able to say so much in so few words with so much wit and
Yes.
wisdom. Ah, so much wit and wisdom. And I feel like, so I've ever since, I was a teenager, it's been Haki. And ever since I was a kid and then had the great fortune to be able to study with her at Virginia Tech, it was Nikki Giovanni.
Yes.
Um, those two, um, of course, Langston. You know, again, I am a big fan of being able to teach something really heavy and 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 find the humor to allow it to be digestible.
Mhm.
So Langston's Jesse B. Simple stories,
Yeah, I love them.
those were, it's still my dream. And I know Walter Mosley at one point had talked about doing this. My dream is to adapt those for television. That needs to happen.
Oh, that
You
would be
know,
phenomenal.
so
Yes.
those are the three writers that I'm often in conversation with in my mind on my page, and they're probably the three who have inspired my writing and my style the most.
Right. And of course, I know that music and art, if you're a poet, is the way that music. Who are the musicians who have inspired you, musicians and artists?
Yeah, so I think I met this woman in like 2003 in Charleston, South Carolina, and we were sitting in her car talking, and she put on some music I had never heard, and from that day forward, I began listening to it every day. I am a huge bossa nova fan. I
Awesome.
so bossa nova,
Yeah.
Brazilian music. And
Okay.
so I got the chance to go to Brazil, and I'm in Brazil, and e- everybody looks like me.
You
It's
went to
it's basic.
Bahia?
Yeah, I went to Bahia, and
Mhm.
it's like little Africa.
Yes.
And I'm listening to the samba and the rhythms and the drums, and I'm like, this is African music. I think, the jazz is so important to me, because it was the music that I listened to and didn't necessarily know about, understand when I was a child. It was the music my parents were listening to. And it's the music that I listened to and began to understand in college. It's the music that I write to. It's the rhythm that I write to. I think the jazz is, you know, although I love all music, I love country, I love hip hop. Jazz is probably that
Mhm.
foundation for me.
Right. Right. We're coming to, I'm going to go back to something you mentioned earlier around the responsibility of the writer and why you felt the need to write. This is the Honey. The first
Mhm.
National Black Writers Conference in 1986 at Medgar Evers College has had as its theme, what is the social responsibility of the writer? And then our most recent conference was All That We Carried. Where do we go from here? So when you're looking at what's happening now with the banned books, with the censoring, the curriculum, the suppression of voting rights, the rise in white supremacy, um, do writers have a social responsibility? And what are your thoughts on what do we do and how do we address this? Or how do you address this?
I think I have a social responsibility.
Okay, you do. Okay.
Absolutely. I think, you know, I remember Nikki saying something to me in college. She said, "Kwame, I can teach you how to write, but I can't teach you how to be interesting."
Okay.
Like, whoa. And I think the idea that, the writing is a vehicle for something. Like you have to have something worth writing about. Why are you doing this thing? What
Mhm.
is its value? What is its importance? And certainly, entertainment is a part of it, but I think inspiration is a big part of it. I think education is another part of it. And I think ultimately the art, the literature, the writing can empower. I try to spend my time writing as a tool for empowerment. How am I going to empower the readers, whether they be young or older? Um, I took a class in 1986. No, 1988. I went to the first National Black Arts Festival in Atlanta. And I was a junior in college, and I had taken a class with Charles Fuller, who
Yes.
wrote a Soldier's play. It was Charles Fuller, it was Douglas Turner Ward, The Day of Absence, the Negro Ensemble Company, and it was Cicely Tyson.
Wow.
And
Lineup.
and and they taught a class. And after the class, Charles Fuller came up. I went up to Charles Fuller. I was like, "Yeah, sir, I'm a playwright. I'm writing. I'm a writer. I'm a poet." And he was like, "Well, what have you written? What are you doing?" And I was like, and it just hit me. I realized I hadn't really finished anything. I just been saying I'm a writer. And it just really made me realize that you have to be about the business of creating art. And art in our community has always been about upliftment. It's been about freedom. So yeah, I think I have a big responsibility to create an art that inspires, that engages, that entertains, and that ultimately empowers.
Thank you. And as we come to a close, what message do you have for young people? Because you are concerned, obviously, about young people. Dr. Bettina Love talks about that we need abolitionist teaching in our schools, abolitionist education. We need to teach our students to thrive, not to just survive. So what is your
Mm,
message to young people, to our young writers, to people who are in the midst of this struggle that we're involved in now?
yeah. Well, I think it starts with like believing in yourself in a way that you believe that not only do you matter, but that you are magnificent. Like you gotta, if you want other people to sort of believe that you are capable, that you matter, then you gotta believe it first. And so I I I like to think I wrote a book about Ali, and it's often credited with him saying it, but I don't know if he said it, but this is what I would leave with young people. I am the greatest. Believe that I am the greatest, not because I am better than anyone else, but because no one is better than me.
Thank you so much, Kwame Alexander. Thank you for all of the work that you're doing. Thank you for uplifting and inspiring us. And thank you for being courageous and taking a look at the inner self, at our challenges and our conflicts, and creating beautiful words, stirring words, and helping us to realize that we can make a difference. And as you said, young people are greatest. We've been talking with Kwame Alexander, the author of This is the Honey, an anthology of contemporary Black poets, and Why Fathers Cry at Night, a memoir in love poems, recipes, letters, and remembrances. You can find Kwame Alexander online talking about, why don't you share Why Fathers Cry? You have a podcast on Why Fathers Cry.
Yeah, I
Understand?
have a podcast, Why Fathers Cry. It aired last year, and we just recorded Why Fathers Cry 1 year later, which is really revelatory. So that will come out next month on Father's Day. So do check that out, and you can find me online at kwamealexander.com.
Thank you so much. This has been such an interesting conversation, brought back so many memories. And
Thank you.
please write to us at writers@mec.cumi.edu. And this is Dr. Brenda Greene. This radio show has been paid for by Medgar College, and you can also watch us online at centerforblackLiterature.org. Check our YouTube page out. Thank you.